The Galactic Dominion had never known defeat. For over 1,000 years, they had crushed resistance across the stars, subjugating worlds with unchallenged efficiency. Their war machine was a perfect synthesis of strategy, technology, and discipline, guided by an unshakable belief in their own supremacy. Entire civilizations had been wiped from existence, their histories reduced to nothing more than data logs in the Dominion's archives. Victory was not a possibility, it was a certainty. At the forefront of this unstoppable force were the Galactic soldiers, the most feared warriors in the known universe. Clad in advanced battle armor, equipped with energy weapons capable of reducing organic matter to ash, they were legends in their own right. They did not hesitate. They did not falter. Their enemies, no matter how brave or numerous, always fell before them. It was with this confidence that the Dominion set its sights on a small, blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star. The inhabitants, called humans, had remained unnoticed for most of the Dominion's reign. Primitive, technologically stagnant, and confined to their own system, they were of no consequence. However, recent reconnaissance indicated rapid advancements in weaponry, tactics, and resource utilization. Unchecked, such a species could become problematic. As always, the Dominion moved preemptively. The invasion fleet arrived in Earth's orbit with practiced precision. Massive warships cast their shadows over continents, deploying waves of drop pods into major population centers. Cities fell silent beneath the sheer presence of the invaders. Resistance, if any, would be brief. The Galactic soldiers had landed. Commander Varesh, a decorated officer of the Dominion's elite, observed the unfolding operation from the bridge of his cruiser. His features, a blend of hardened reptilian scales and cybernetic enhancements, remained impassive. He had led dozens of conquests, each one ending in absolute subjugation. This would be no different. Scans indicate primitive projectile-based defenses, an officer reported. No energy shielding detected. Their military is mobilizing, but they lack orbital support. Varesh allowed himself a rare moment of amusement. The humans were actually preparing to fight. Deploy ground forces in key locations, he commanded. Crush any resistance swiftly. On the surface, the first wave of Galactic soldiers moved through abandoned streets, their armor reflecting the neon glow of the city's artificial lights. Tactical scanners painted the battlefield in a mosaic of data, identifying potential threats before they could materialize. The soldiers advanced without hesitation, expecting the usual sequence: panic, futile resistance, surrender. But something was different. The streets were too quiet. Civilian movement was minimal. No crude barricades, no scattered fire from desperate defenders. Even the buildings, many of them still powered, showed no signs of life. The soldiers spread out, their weapons primed. A single shot echoed through the night. The lead soldier, encased in reinforced plating, collapsed instantly. Not from an energy blast, not from an explosive round, but from something else, something faster, more precise. The unit hesitated for a fraction of a second, recalibrating their sensors to locate the shooter. Another shot. A second soldier fell. Their body twitched as the impact severed critical neural connections. The targeting systems, so reliable against every known enemy, failed to pinpoint the source of the attack. The shots came from nowhere, silent and deadly. Panic was an emotion unknown to the Galactic soldiers, yet something unsettling crept into their collective awareness. They had faced planetary defense systems, orbital bombardments, mechanized infantry. None had struck with such terrifying precision. More fell. Each shot found a weakness, bypassing armor plating, striking at exposed joints, unprotected visors. Their advanced technology, designed to withstand plasma bursts and directed energy weapons, was failing against something far simpler. From a concealed position, Captain Elias Carter watched through the scope of his rifle, his breath slow and controlled. He had trained for this moment, spent years perfecting the art of marksmanship. He didn't need energy weapons or advanced targeting systems, just patience, skill, and a clear line of sight. 5 down, he whispered into his radio. They're adapting. We need to move. Around him, other marksmen shifted positions, slipping through the ruins like ghosts. They had spent weeks preparing for this invasion, studying enemy movements, understanding their weaknesses. The Galactic soldiers, for all their technology, relied too heavily on their armor and their overwhelming firepower. They weren't used to an enemy they couldn't see. From orbit, Varesh watched the operation unfold, his confidence beginning to wane. He had expected resistance but not casualties, not like this. Tactical analysis, he demanded. Losses are accelerating, the officer admitted, his voice tight. The enemy is using projectile-based sniping techniques. Extremely precise. Snipers. Varesh narrowed his eyes. That is not a viable threat. Adjust targeting protocols and eliminate them. We are trying, the officer said carefully. But they are not engaging directly. They fire and relocate before countermeasures can be deployed. Our forces are struggling to identify them. Varesh's claws tightened against the metal railing. This was unacceptable. No primitive species had ever posed such a challenge. And yet, his soldiers, his elite warriors, were dying. Not in explosive battles, not in glorious combat, but in silence, picked off one by one. The reports continued. Entire squads disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Enemy snipers anticipated their movements, striking key personnel with near supernatural accuracy. The city, once thought to be defenseless, had become a killing field. For the first time in Dominion history, an invasion force halted its advance. Varesh's mind raced. This could not be allowed. He needed to regain control, to break whatever unnatural advantage these humans possessed. His orders would be swift. Deploy aerial reconnaissance, flood the battlefield with drones, smoke out these hidden assassins. But as he prepared to give the command, another message arrived. One that sent an unfamiliar chill down his spine. A simple transmission from one of his surviving ground units. They see us. And then, silence. The second wave landed at dawn. Drop ships descended through the turbulent atmosphere, their hulls gleaming under the rising sun. This time there was no hesitation. The Dominion had recalibrated, adapted, and reinforced. What had begun as a routine conquest had turned into something far more insidious. Their enemy was invisible, patient, and precise. The Galactic soldiers, for the first time in their history, felt the weight of uncertainty. Varesh watched from orbit, his hands clasped behind his back. He had spent the long hours analyzing the failure of the first wave, dissecting every engagement. The numbers were undeniable. 72 confirmed kills. No returned fire. No visible enemy forces. Entire squads eliminated without a single energy discharge detected. It was a massacre, not in scale but in efficiency. This time they would not underestimate the humans. On the ground, the soldiers moved with coordinated precision. Armored units deployed at every major intersection. Drones swept ahead, scanning rooftops, alleyways, and ruins for heat signatures. The air was thick with the hum of active sensors, broadcasting a constant pulse designed to reveal hidden targets. The silence that had unnerved them before was now broken by the steady march of their advance. And yet, despite their preparations, the city still felt wrong. Corporal Dren of the 3rd Assault Division adjusted his visor, scanning the surrounding buildings. He had fought on a dozen worlds, torn through enemy lines with brute force and relentless firepower. This mission should have been no different. But the deaths of the first wave lingered in his mind. They had watched the footage, grainy, disjointed clips from failing helmet feeds. It had been surreal, the way the soldiers fell without ever spotting their attackers. One moment they stood, the next they collapsed, their bodies jerking unnaturally as if struck by an unseen force. Even their armor, reinforced against concussive and thermal blasts, had been pierced effortlessly. A flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, weapon raised. Just a shifting shadow. The wind stirring debris. His pulse remained steady, but the unease in his gut grew. Further down the ruined street, a scout unit relayed data back to command. No enemy signatures detected. Thermal scans are negative. They weren't there. And yet they were. The first shot rang out, and a soldier crumpled before anyone had registered the sound. Dren's instincts took over. Cover. Cover now. The squad scattered, dropping behind debris and fallen structures. Sensors scrambled to pinpoint the attack, but the shot had come from nowhere. No heat bloom, no electromagnetic signature, nothing for the system to track. Just cold, mechanical death. Another shot. Another body. Dren gritted his teeth. He didn't know what a sniper was before this campaign. His kind had never needed such a thing. Wars were won with overwhelming firepower, not patience. The idea of a single combatant taking lives from such a distance, with such unerring accuracy, was unnatural. The soldiers activated countermeasures. Smoke dispensers burst to life, flooding the streets with thick, blinding plumes. AI-driven targeting systems adjusted trajectories, searching for angles of attack. But no follow-up shots came. The enemy had already moved. Somewhere in the ruins, Elias Carter exhaled slowly, the warmth of his breath misting against the cold metal of his rifle. He had watched them land, seen their adjustments, noted the new formations. They had learned. That was fine. So had he. The key was patience. It always was. These invaders, for all their dominance, relied too much on control. They believed the battlefield was theirs to dictate. But Earth wasn't some open war front, some planet to be subjugated with brute force. It was a maze, a puzzle only the prepared could navigate. Carter shifted his position, crawling through the wreckage of an office building. His team had already dispersed, each marksman playing their role. They would never be caught in one place. Never fire from the same position twice. The moment the enemy thought they had a lock, they would already be gone. Movement below. He spotted them, 3-man units moving in careful, staggered patterns, leapfrogging between cover. Better tactics this time. They were adapting. But adaptation wasn't enough. Not here. His crosshairs hovered over a squad leader, the officer directing the unit's maneuvers. Carter inhaled. The shot cracked through the air. The leader's body folded in on itself, crashing to the ground. The others hesitated, half a second, maybe less. It was enough. 2 more shots, 2 more down. The last soldier fired wildly, his energy bolts searing through empty space. Then silence. Carter adjusted his radio frequency. Echo team, shift south. They're tightening formations. A voice responded, calm and steady. Copy that. Repositioning. The battle unfolded in brutal, methodical sequences. The Dominion's forces pushed forward, only to find themselves walking into the same invisible gauntlet. Every street became a trap, every open space a shooting gallery. The Galactic soldiers were trained for battle, but this was something else entirely. Varesh clenched his jaw as the casualty reports streamed in. This was no longer resistance. This was extermination. His forces, his elite warriors, were being hunted. His officers stood stiffly behind him, waiting for orders. He could hear their unease in the silence between reports, in the way they shifted ever so slightly. The invincible Dominion, the unchallenged force of the cosmos, was hesitating. Unacceptable. Deploy aerial support, Varesh commanded. Flush them out. If they want to hide, we will leave them nowhere to run. Dren received the order moments later. Overhead, drones streaked across the city, their sensors sweeping relentlessly. Fires broke out as targeted explosives collapsed entire buildings suspected of housing enemy combatants. It was no longer about precision. It was about destruction. But even as the ruins burned, the shots did not stop. Dren gritted his teeth, pressing against the cracked stone of a collapsed wall. He could feel it now, the same fear that had gripped the first wave. Not fear of death, he had been trained beyond such things. But fear of something unknown, something that could see him even when he could not see it. A whisper crackled through his earpiece. One of the recon teams. Their voices were strained, almost frantic. They're not just sharpshooters. They know how we think. How we move. It's like they're inside our heads. Dren did not respond. He wasn't sure what to say. In orbit, Varesh's claws dug into the metal of the command console. He had lost contact with too many units. This wasn't war. This was annihilation, executed with terrifying precision. Then came the transmission. A lone, garbled message from the surface. They're everywhere. And then nothing. The Dominion had underestimated them. That much was undeniable. The battlefield was no longer theirs to control. Every street, every ruined building, every broken highway had become a hunting ground, and the Galactic soldiers, once the most feared warriors in the known universe, had become the prey. Varesh stood rigid on the command deck, staring at the tactical display before him. The battlefield was a mess of shifting red markers, entire squads disappearing in flashes of static as their signals were lost. His forces were trapped in an enemy's game they did not understand, and worse, they were losing the will to fight. The term was foreign to him. He had never known what it meant to fear an opponent. But now he saw it, heard it in the strained reports from officers on the ground, in the way his subordinates hesitated before speaking. His soldiers, his invincible warriors, were afraid. The latest transmission had chilled him in a way nothing before had. Not because of the words themselves, but because of who had spoken them. High Commander Yarrick, a soldier who had once torn through an entire resistance force single-handedly, had sent a final, desperate message before all contact was lost. They're everywhere. Varesh turned from the display, his metallic claws flexing in frustration. The enemy was still unseen, still striking from impossible distances, but that wasn't the worst of it. The humans weren't just killing his soldiers, they were unraveling them. The Dominion's forces had never fought an enemy that did not engage directly, that did not challenge them in open combat. Every time they thought they understood the battlefield, it changed. Every time they tried to predict the next attack, it came from somewhere they hadn't anticipated. The enemy wasn't just fighting them. They were inside their heads. Down on the surface, the paranoia had settled in. The once fearless soldiers moved in tight formations, their weapons constantly raised, scanning for threats they would never see in time. The drone sweeps had done little to counter the marksmen, and now even those drones were being taken out mid-flight, shot down with pinpoint accuracy before they could gather useful data. There was no safe place, no high ground, no moment of reprieve. Dren crouched behind the remnants of a collapsed bridge, his helmet scanning through multiple vision modes in a desperate attempt to catch something, anything, before the next attack came. His unit was down to 4 men, the others lost one by one in the past hours. They had stopped speaking, stopped reporting kills, stopped calling for support that would never come. A sudden sharp crack. The soldier beside him jerked, falling forward without a sound. Another shot. The one behind him collapsed, blood misting in the air. Dren's breath hitched. No direction. No muzzle flash. No time to react. "They're in the buildings," he whispered over comms, though he wasn't sure if that was true. His visor scanned the towering ruins, but the windows were empty, the shadows undisturbed. Then another shot rang out and the last soldier dropped. Alone now. He pressed his back against the cold stone, forcing himself to think. The enemy was calculating. Unnaturally patient. They weren't firing indiscriminately, they were dismantling command structures, taking out officers, isolating individuals. Dren had never considered that his armor, his weapons, his training, none of it mattered if he was already marked for death before he even raised his rifle. Something moved in the distance. A shift of light, the barest flicker against the backdrop of destruction. Could have been nothing, but he fired anyway. The plasma bolt screamed through the air, striking a window frame and scorching the stone. No return fire came. He was being watched. Dren activated his visor's dampening field and ran. He didn't know where he was going, just that he needed to move. His steps pounded against the cracked pavement, his breath harsh inside the confines of his helmet. He needed cover, needed distance, needed... A final shot rang out. From his perch, Elias Carter watched as the last soldier crumpled mid-stride, momentum carrying the body forward before it hit the ground. He exhaled, adjusting his grip on the rifle. There was no satisfaction in this. Only necessity. Through his earpiece, a voice murmured, "They're breaking." He had seen it too. The Galactic soldiers, the so-called masters of warfare, were beginning to unravel. They had entered this war believing themselves untouchable, believing in their own dominance. But their armor couldn't stop a well-placed round. Their numbers meant nothing when they didn't know where to aim. Carter had watched them change over the past days. At first they had moved with purpose, swift and overwhelming. Then the caution set in. Their formations tightened. Their movements slowed. And now they were flinching at shadows, hesitating before crossing open ground, questioning every step. Fear. That was the real weapon. It had started as a ripple, a whisper, a moment of doubt creeping in between their calculated maneuvers. But now it was spreading through their ranks like a sickness. And fear led to mistakes. Carter shifted his position again, methodical, patient. His team was doing the same, spreading through the city like ghosts. The Galactic soldiers still had numbers, still had firepower, but none of it would save them if they didn't know where to strike. Varesh watched another unit go silent, his frustration turning to something colder. This was spiraling out of control. His forces weren't just losing soldiers, they were losing discipline. Reports of soldiers hesitating to engage, avoiding certain districts, refusing to patrol alone. Some had even disobeyed orders outright, retreating against protocol. Unacceptable. But even as he thought it, he knew the truth. The Dominion had never been tested like this before. They had never faced an enemy that could make them question themselves. These humans, these marksmen, had found a weakness in the heart of their war machine. And now they were exploiting it mercilessly. Something had to change. Varesh's voice was like steel as he turned to his officers. Initiate full withdrawal from all compromised zones. Regroup, consolidate forces. We end this before they tear us apart completely. He could not allow this war to continue like this. The soldiers on the ground could not be trusted to recover morale on their own. This wasn't a battle of firepower anymore. It was a battle of control. And if there was one thing the Dominion still had, it was control. As the orders filtered down to the ground, the remaining soldiers began pulling back, abandoning entire districts to the shadows. For now, at least, the war was not over. Not yet. But for the first time in Dominion history, they were no longer advancing. They were retreating. The void of space stretched endlessly before him, cold and indifferent, but Varesh could feel the weight of the planet behind him like a phantom limb. A world that should have fallen in days, reduced to rubble beneath the might of the Dominion. Instead, it remained defiant, untouched in any way that mattered. He had lost. The word settled like a stone in his chest, heavy and alien. The Dominion did not lose. It was not in their nature, not in their history. Conquest was inevitable, their supremacy unchallenged. Yet the battle reports told a different story. Hundreds of soldiers gone, not in a glorious clash of warships or planetary bombardments, but in a slow, creeping erosion of morale, of discipline, of control. And all because of them. Varesh had reviewed the footage. The enemy was never seen, never engaged in traditional combat. There were no battle cries, no heroic last stands, no drawn-out firefights. Just silence. Pause. Then a single shot. One soldier gone. And then another. And another. Until his warriors, his elite, were reduced to frightened prey, too afraid to even raise their weapons. The humans called them marksmen. Varesh had another word for them. Predators. He turned from the view screen and strode toward the command table, his officers standing stiffly around it. None spoke. What could they say? There was no defense for what had happened. The silence was an admission of failure. Finally, one of them gathered the courage to ask, "What are your orders, Supreme Commander?" Varesh's claws flexed against the metal of the table. The Dominion did not forget humiliation. It did not leave wounds unavenged. The humans had won this battle, but they had not won the war. The next time they returned to this world, it would not be with squads of soldiers marching through cities. There would be no cautious advances, no attempts to establish control. The next time there would be fire. "Begin preparations," he said, his voice even measured. "A full-scale planetary assault. No deployments. No ground engagements. We will burn them from orbit." The officers nodded, relief washing over them. This was familiar. This was how war was supposed to be waged. Overwhelming force, annihilation, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Yet even as Varesh spoke the words, a thought coiled in the back of his mind, dark and unwelcome. The humans had not fought them in the open. They had refused to meet them head-on. Why? Because they knew they would lose. They had adapted, found weakness, turned fear into a weapon sharper than any blade. What if they had another trick waiting? What if they had known all along that the Dominion would retaliate? A quiet unease settled in his chest. He hated it. Hated that they had made him doubt. Across the void, back on the surface, Carter lay flat against the rooftop, staring up at the departing warships. The sky had been thick with fire and smoke for days, but now it was empty. Quiet. The silence felt unnatural after so many hours of waiting, watching, eliminating. "They're gone," came the voice in his earpiece. Carter nodded to himself. For now. His hands ached from holding position for so long, his muscles stiff from remaining motionless. Every shot had been deliberate, every move calculated. But the exhaustion was worth it. The job had been done. He pulled back from the scope, rolling onto his back and exhaling. The others would be doing the same, retreating into whatever shadows they had claimed as their own. They had won, but victory did not mean rest. "They'll be back," another voice murmured over comms. Carter closed his eyes for a brief moment. Yeah, they will. And next time it wouldn't be infantry. It wouldn't be squads of armored soldiers marching through the streets. It would be something bigger. Something worse. But that was the thing about war. It was never fair. And it was never over. Carter sat up, reaching for his rifle. The Dominion believed they had seen the worst of humanity. They had no idea what was coming next,